A single photograph. For over 100 years, it stayed in the archives, valued for its elegance and composure. But when modern technology finally unveiled what had been hiding in plain sight, researchers were left stunned. What was it? What unbelievable detail failed to notice? If you're eager to uncover stories that history has buried, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. You won't believe where this quest will take us. Charleston, South Carolina, October 1899, within the studio of William Harrison, one of the few photographers in the city who accepted black patrons. A family assembled for a portrait that would ultimately become one of the most remarkable pieces of American history. The studio was filled with folders of developing methods and furniture polish. Heavy velvet drapes blocked the afternoon sunlight, while gas lamps lit a hand-painted backdrop portraying a library lined with leather-bound books. This was the fantasy Harrison sold, a vision of affluence and culture. Thomas, the father, wore a dark wool three-piece suit, impeccably cut, despite his trade as a master carpenter. His watch chain shimmered across his vest. Elizabeth, his wife, posed beside him in an elegant burgundy silk dress adorned with black lace at the neck, her hair arranged in the fashionable Gibson girl style. Their 5 children ranged in age from 23 down to 6. The eldest son wore a suit nearly as fine as his father's. The daughters were dressed in white high-collared blouses and long dark skirts. The middle son appeared uneasy in his stiff collar, but kept his posture straight. And then there was Samuel, the youngest, just 6 years old, wearing a little suit with short pants, white stockings, and polished shoes. His expression held that familiar blend of solemnity and barely suppressed fidgeting that all children displayed before cameras when exposures demanded total stillness. Harrison positioned them with care. Thomas and Elizabeth at the center, children arranged according to height. With young Samuel on the front right, he placed a small table beside them, covering it with an embroidered cloth and setting an open book on top. Now everyone, stay perfectly still. Harrison directed, fix your eyes on the lens. Think of something that fills you with pride. The family obeyed. Samuel kept his hands at his sides, one resting gently against his father's leg. The shutter opened. Light poured through the lens. Time stood still. The photograph was taken. Thomas paid $3 and returned 2 weeks later to collect the print. That portrait hung in their parlor for years, then endured moves and hardships until it was donated to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It was cataloged, admired, studied, but no one observed. The secret was present in the silver collar crystals that were visible for the next 124 years. Rachel Foster had been working at the National Museum of African American History and Culture for 8 years. Her work was systematic, often monotonous, but deeply significant, scanning the museum's vast photographic collection using equipment that could detect details invisible to the naked eye. The new scanner was an extraordinary device, capable of 4 Polydactyly resolution, exposing rapid textures in paper grain, even individual crystals of the original silver emulsion. It was designed to digitally preserve fragile images while extracting every possible detail. On a freezing January morning in 2023, Rachel retrieved a photograph from climate-controlled storage. The label read, Thomas Family, Charleston, SC, 1899, studio portrait, donated 1987. She had encountered it before, beautiful, striking in its dignity, the family's clothing, their posture. Their steady gaze conveyed pride and achievement. Precisely the kind of image the museum valued. Evidence of black prosperity in an era when such stories were deliberately suppressed. Rachel placed the photograph on the scanner bed and initiated the scan. The image appeared line by line in stunning clarity. Faces emerged first, then clothing, the painted backdrop, the decorative table. Then the scan reached the bottom where young Samuel stood. Rachel's hand paused. She leaned closer, her breath catching. Something about the child's right hand seemed unusual. She zoomed in once, then again and again, until the pixels sharpened into perfect focus. "Oh my God," she whispered. Samuel's right hand, resting against his father's leg, had 6 fingers. Not a blurred artifact, not an optical illusion. 6 distinct, fully formed fingers clearly visible in the high-resolution scan. Rachel leaned back, her thoughts spinning. She zoomed to the left hand, normal, 5 fingers. She returned to the right, 6 fingers, unmistakable. The extra digit appeared beside the pinky. Postaxial polydactyly. It wasn't some tiny stub. It seemed proportionate, functional, simply another finger. Rachel's heart raced as she searched the museum's database. Who was this family? Were there other photographs? Medical records? Within an hour, she had a name: Thomas, master carpenter of Charleston. Within 2 hours, she made a call that would change everything. "Dr. Webb, this is Dr. Rachel Foster from the National Museum of African American History. I need you to come to Washington immediately. I think I discovered something incredible." Dr. Marcus Webb arrived at the museum 48 hours later, a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University specializing in hereditary conditions in African American populations. Marcus approached the work with deep awareness of the history of bodies and exploited in medical research. Rachel greeted him in the examination room, a photograph resting in an archival sleeve on a light table. Beside it, a laptop displayed a high-resolution scan. "Thank you for coming," Rachel said. "I need you to confirm I'm not imagining this." Marcus put on white cotton gloves and lifted the photograph, studying it with his naked eye. At normal viewing distance, the family looked exactly as expected. Dignified, well-dressed, proud. He could barely distinguish individual fingers at this resolution. Then he turned to the digital scan. Rachel had zoomed in on Samuel's right hand. Marcus's eyes widened. Bilateral or unilateral? Unilateral. Only the right hand. Marcus studied the image intently. Postaxial polydactyly. The extra digit is next to the pinky. And look, it's not deformed. It appears fully formed with complete articulation. He sat back, removing his glasses. This is extraordinary. Polydactyly occurs in about 1 in every 1,000 births. But to capture it so clearly in an 1899 photograph, and for it to remain unnoticed for over a century. "There's more," Rachel said, pulling out a slim folder. The donor mentioned this family were master carpenters in Charleston. Multiple generations of skilled craftsmen, highly respected. Marcus's interest sharpened. Multiple generations. Do we know if the trait appeared in other family members? That's what I need your help to determine. They began painstaking historical research. The 1900 census provided basic information. Thomas, born approximately 1849, occupation carpenter. Elizabeth, his wife, 5 children, including Samuel, age 7. A property deed from 1897 showed Thomas had purchased a building on King Street. Notable for a black man in that era. A clerk's notation read Thomas, master carpenter of considerable reputation. They weren't struggling. Rachel observed. This was a successful family. Marcus nodded. Which makes me wonder, if this child had a 6th finger and the family was prosperous, they clearly didn't conceal it. They placed him front and center in a professional portrait. What does that tell us? Perhaps they didn't view it as shameful, Marcus replied. Or they were aware of it and considered it normal because to trace this lineage. If it's hereditary, there could be descendants alive today. The work is slow and frustrating. Reconstruction records were incomplete, lost, or deliberately destroyed. Black families were expected on records. The Great Migration scattered families nationwide. Great Street Baptist Church in Charleston provided the first breakthrough. Thomas and Elizabeth had been active members, and careful record-keeping revealed their children's births and baptisms. Samuel, born March 1893. His older siblings James, Clara, Margaret, and William. But there was something more. A note in Samuel's baptismal record written in neat script, received into God's grace marked with his distinction, "Blessed be his Maker's hands." Maker's hands, Marcus repeated. That's unusual wording. Rachel searched digitized church records. Look here. A church newsletter from 1905 mentions Thomas's carpentry business taking on apprentices. It says, "Continuing the tradition of the Maker's hands, passed from father to son." Marcus felt the thrill of discovery. It's a family phrase. Something inherited, something special about their hands. The genealogical trail led forward. James, the eldest, stayed in Charleston, continuing the carpentry business. His children appeared in the 1920 census. One son, Robert, appeared in city directories through the 1940s as a woodworker. Then the trail went cold. Robert vanished from Charleston records after 1947. Marcus checked Great Migration records, databases of Black Americans who relocated north during the World Wars. They're in a 1948 Philadelphia directory. Robert Thomas Carpenter, South Street. From Philadelphia, the trail continued. Robert's children, then grandchildren. Some stayed in Pennsylvania. Others scattered to Maryland, New Jersey, New York. Each generation represented hours of searching. 3 months into their research, Rachel discovered a genealogy forum post that made her hands tremble. "Marcus," she called. "I think I've found him. A living descendant." The post was from David Clark, researching his Charleston ancestors named Thomas, referencing carpentry, referencing a family story about special hands. Rachel sent a message immediately. The response came within an hour. "Yes. When can we meet? I've been waiting my whole life to understand this story." Saturday morning in early April. He was 47. Orthopedic surgeon at a Baltimore hospital. Investigating his Charleston roots for nearly 6 years. My grandfather died when I was 15. But he used to tell tales about our ancestors, about Thomas and Margaret, who built Charleston's finest furniture, about homes that could do things other humans couldn't. All of living in what master He paused, emotion flickering across his face. I thought they were just exaggerated stories, but then my daughter was born. Rachel leaned forward. "David, may I ask something personal? Do you have any unusual genetic traits?" David extended his right hand, palm up. There, beside his pinky finger, was a 6th finger, fully formed, naturally placed, clearly functional. "Only my right hand," he said quietly. "I was born with it. Doctors told my parents to have it surgically removed. They said it would make life easier, but my grandfather refused. He said, 'That hand is who we are. Don't you dare cut away what God and blood gave him.'" Marcus stared, his thoughts racing. "Do you know if other family members have this trait?" "My grandfather had it. Same hand, same finger. He was a carpenter like his father and grandfather. He joked that the extra finger made him better at his work." David's voice grew thick. "My daughter has it too. She's 7. When she was born, and I saw that little 6th finger, I understood. It's not a flaw. It's our identity." Rachel pushed the 1899 photograph toward David. "We believe this is your great-great-grandfather, Thomas. And this," she pointed to Samuel, "we believe this is your great-grandfather." David took the photograph with unsteady hands. He studied it, absorbing the formal poses, the fine clothing, the dignity. Then his gaze fell on Samuel. Even in the original image, knowing what to search for, he could barely detect the subtle difference in the child's right hand. "I've never seen his face," David whispered. "My grandfather described him, but no photos endured. He looked up, tears glistening. "How did you uncover this?" Rachel explained the scanning technology. Marcus outlined the genetic implications. "We'd like to conduct genetic testing," Marcus said cautiously. "With your permission, if we can map the mutation and trace it through your family, we might be documenting one of the longest hereditary genetic traits in American history." David nodded. "What would you do?" "Blood samples from family members, including your daughter, if you consent." "I'll do it," David said immediately. "My daughter's proud of her. She calls it her special finger. She'll want to be part of this." The genetic testing took 6 weeks. Marcus collected blood from David. 3 cousins were agreed to participate, and with careful consent from David's father. Samples went to Johns Hopkins Genetics Lab for sequencing and analysis. While waiting for results, Marcus delved into medical literature. Polydactyly was well documented, occurring in about 1 in 10,000 births. It could be isolated or part of genetic syndromes. Postaxial polydactyly, extra digits on the pinky side, was more common in African and African American populations, suggesting ancient genetic roots. But what made a trait persist across generations? Most polydactyly cases were sporadic, occurring randomly. Hereditary cases existed, but rarely extended beyond 3 or 4 generations in documented medical literature. If David's family truly traced this trait back to Samuel in 1899, and if Samuel had inherited it from his father Thomas, and if family stories about earlier generations were accurate, they might be looking at one of the longest documented hereditary polydactyly lineages in medical history. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning. Marcus called Rachel and David immediately, asking them to meet at his Johns Hopkins office. When they gathered around his desk, Marcus pulled up genetic sequencing data on his monitor. "I've confirmed it," he began, his voice tight with excitement. "The polydactyly in your family is caused by a specific mutation in the GLI3 gene, which regulates limb development during fetal formation." He pulled up a molecular diagram. "This particular variant is exceptionally rare. I've searched global genetic databases. There are fewer than 20 documented cases worldwide with this exact mutation." David leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means your family's genetic line is extraordinarily unique," Marcus continued. "Based on the genealogical records Rachel compiled and the genetic testing we've conducted, we can now trace this trait back at least 6 confirmed generations. From your daughter Emma, born 2016, back to Samuel in the 1890s. He pulled up a family tree showing the documented generations with red markers, indicating confirmed polydactyly. And based on family oral history and the church records that reference makers' hands, being passed from father to son, the trait likely extends back, possibly to Thomas's father or grandfather, which would mean 8 to 10 generations total." Rachel spoke quietly. "That would place the origin sometime in the early to mid-1800s, possibly in the enslaved population." Marcus nodded. "GLI3 mutation likely originated in West Africa, when their ancestor was enslaved and brought to America. Carried that gene as a dominant trait. It had a high probability of being passed from each generation." David sat back, absorbing the information. "My grandfather said the gift came from Africa, from ancestors who were makers and builders." "He was right," Marcus said. "And there's something else." He pulled up comparative data. "I've been analyzing hand function and dexterity. David, your 12-fingered hands don't just give you more digits. They give you measurably superior fine motor control in specific tasks. Your ancestors weren't just proud because their hands were unique. They were proud because those hands made them genuinely exceptional craftsmen." With genetic confirmation, Marcus and Rachel intensified their historical research. determined to trace the trait as far back as possible. They returned to Charleston, visiting historical societies, church archives, and even elderly community members whose families had lived in the city for generations. Mr. James Washington, a 91-year-old archivist at a small, low-country museum, provided unexpected insight. "Six-Finger Thomas," he said when Marcus mentioned the name. "My grandfather used to tell stories. Said Thomas was the finest craftsman he'd ever seen. Could shape wood like it was clay." He pulled out a worn leather journal. His grandfather's notes from the 1920s. "My grandfather was a wheelwright. He worked sometimes with Charleston carpenters. He wrote this after Thomas passed away in 1923. Marcus read aloud. "Thomas died yesterday, age 75. The finest carpenter Charleston never knew. His son James carries on the work, and James's boy too. Both with their grandfather's blessed hands. They say the gift goes back to Thomas's father and his father before him. Back to the old country before the chains." Rachel's eyes widened. Back to Africa. The trait predated enslavement. Mr. Washington nodded. That's what people believed. Something Thomas's ancestors brought with them across the water. Something the slavers couldn't take away. Armed with this lead, Marcus contacted researchers specializing in African genetic populations. Through comparative databases and historical migration patterns, they identified a possible origin in West Africa, specifically parts of modern day Nigeria and Cameroon, where certain woodworking and metalworking guilds had been documented by colonial ethnographics in the late 1800s. One obscure anthropological text from 1987, written by a British colonial officer, described visiting the master carver's workshop. The craftsman possessed an unusual feature, 6 digits on each hand, which only ran his family generations, passed from master to apprentice through bloodlines. He attributed his extraordinary skill to this inherited distinction. Marcus showed the text to Rachel and David during their next meeting. "I can't prove definitively that this craftsman was your ancestor," he told David. "The historical record doesn't allow that level of specificity, but the geographic region, the time period, the craft tradition, and the hereditary nature of the trait all align." David traced the words on the page with his finger. "My grandfather said we were makers, that it was in our blood, passed down through generations who refused to forget who they were, even in chains." Rachel added, "What makes your family's story so powerful is that they didn't just survive the horror of enslavement. They preserved their identity through their craft. The polydactyly became a marker of that identity, a physical manifestation of unbroken lineage." Marcus pulled up the 1899 photograph on his laptop, zooming in on young Samuel's 6-fingered hand. This photograph captured more than a family portrait. It captured a genetic and cultural legacy that stretched back to Africa and forward to your daughter Emma. 10, possibly 12 generations of continuous transmission. Marcus, Rachel, and David decided to publish their findings. The paper, co-authored by all three, was titled Hereditary Polydactyly as Cultural and Genetic Legacy, a multi-generational African-American lineage. It was submitted to the Journal of Medical Genetics and Human Evolution. The response was immediate. The journal fast-tracked peer review, and within 2 months the paper was accepted. But before publication, word spread through academic circles. Geneticists, historians, and anthropologists reached out, fascinated by the intersection of genetics, history, and cultural identity. The museum decided to mount a special exhibition, Hands of Legacy, the Thomas family story. Rachel curated it, featuring the 1899 photograph as the centerpiece, displayed alongside high-resolution details showing Samuel's 6-fingered hand. The exhibition medical sketches from 1904, genealogical charts tracing 10 generations, genetic diagrams explaining the GLI3 mutation, His surgical instruments explode beside weapons and pieces of armored tools. The visual parallel was striking. The same hand separated by more than a century, wove into their 12 fingers to create and heal. The exhibition opened in September 2022. Thousands visited the first meeting. Major news outlets picked up the story. The Washington Post, NPR, the New York Times, international media. The photograph that had sat forgotten for 124 years now circulated globally. But something unexpected happened. David began receiving messages, dozens, then hundreds, from other people with polydactyly. Parents of children born with extra digits wrote that they had decided against surgical removal. After reading about David's family, adults who had hidden their hands their whole lives sent photos, many showing their faces alongside their unique anatomy for the first time. One message particularly moved David from a woman in Nigeria. "My son has hands like yours. In our village, we have stories of ancestors with these hands, craftsmen and healers. Reading your family's story helped me understand. This is not a curse. It is a gift that travels through blood." David read the message to Marcus and Rachel during the exhibition's opening night, his voice thick with emotion. "For so long, I thought our story was just about my family. But it's bigger. It's about how difference can be strength, how something the medical world sees as an abnormality can be a source of identity, skill, and pride." Marcus nodded. "Your family's story challenges how we think about genetic variation, not as defects to be corrected, but as diversity to be understood and sometimes celebrated." The exhibition's impact rippled outward. Medical schools began using David's family story in genetics curricula, teaching students about hereditary traits through the lens of cultural competence and respect. Support groups for families affected by polydactyly cited the exhibition as transformative, helping them reframe difference as distinction. 6 months after the exhibition opened, David sat with his daughter Emma at the museum, standing before the 1899 photograph. Emma was 7 now, old enough to understand what the image meant, what it said about who she was. "That's Samuel," David said, pointing to the small figure in the front. "He's your great." Emma studied the photograph intently, then looked at her own right hand, flexing her 6 fingers. Did people make fun of her? David knelt beside her. "We don't know for sure, but we know his family was proud. They dressed him in their best clothes, took him to a photographer's studio. That was expensive back. They put him right in the front where everyone could see him. Emma said, "Exactly like that." Emma returned her gaze to the photograph. "Tell me again about the maker's hands." David smiled. "Your great-great-great-great-grandfather Thomas was a carpenter. He built things from wood. His father was also a carpenter, and his father before him. They had hands like ours with the extra finger, and people said it made them the best craftsmen in Charleston. They called it maker's hands because they could make things other people couldn't." "And you're a doctor," Emma said. "You fix people's hands." "I do. And my extra finger helps me do surgery that other doctors find difficult. It gives me better control, better precision." Emma flexed her fingers again, watching them move. "When I grow up, what will I make with my maker's hands?" The question hung in the air, beautiful in its openness. David felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Whatever you want, sweetheart. Whatever you dream." They stood together in silence. 3 centuries of genetic inheritance connecting them to the small boy in the photograph. Samuel, frozen at age 6, dressed in his finest clothes, his right hand resting against his father's leg, his 6 fingers captured in silver halide crystals, waiting 124 years to be seen. Later that evening, Emma asked if she could write a letter to Samuel. David helped her compose it. Dear great-great-great-grandfather Samuel, my name is Emma. I'm 7 years old. I have hands like yours. 6 fingers on my right hand. My daddy says you were proud of your hands, and your family was proud of you. I'm proud too. I'm proud of my hand. And I'm proud that we're family. Thank you for not hiding. Thank you for being in the picture so we could find you. Love, Emma. David placed the letter in a frame next to Emma's photo on his desk. 2 children separated by 124 years, connected by 6 fingers and an unbroken bloodline. Both photographed, both visible, both proud. 1 year after the exhibition opened, David returned to Charleston for the first time since childhood. He brought Emma, wanting her to see where her ancestors they had walked. To touch wood they might have shaken. They found the building where Thomas's carpentry shop had stood on the Green Street. It was a restaurant now, completely renovated, but the bones of the structure remained. High ceilings, wild boar frames, and thick support beams that spoke of 19th century craftsmanship. The restaurant owner, learning why David and Emma had come, opened to explore. There was a lot of renovation. Original wood beams were still visible. David ran his hand, his 12-fingered hand, across the wood, feeling the marks of hand tools, the precision of joints fitted without nails or screws. Your great-great-great-great-grandfather made this, he told Emma, with hands like ours. They visited Morris Street Baptist Church, where Samuel had been baptized. The current pastor welcomed them warmly, pulling out the original baptismal records to show Emma her ancestor's name written in careful script, along with a note about maker's hands. At the museum's Charleston satellite location, they saw a traveling version of the exhibition. Local families came, many descendants of the black craftsmen and tradespeople who had built Charleston's prosperity, despite being denied its full benefits. They shared stories of their own ancestors, their own family traits, their own survival of history's cruelties. An elderly woman approached David and Emma. My great-grandfather knew Thomas, she said. Used to tell stories about him. Said he was a quiet man, but his work spoke loud. Said you could always tell furniture Thomas made because it was perfect. Joints so tight, finish so smooth. Said Thomas had special hands. Emma held up her right hand. I have them too. The woman's eyes widened, then filled with tears. She took Emma's hand gently in both of hers. Blessed child, you carry him with you. That evening, sitting on the hotel balcony overlooking Charleston Harbor, David told Emma about the Middle Passage, about the enslaved Africans who had been brought across that water in chains, about how her ancestor, perhaps Samuel's great-great-grandfather, had survived that journey with nothing but his body, his memory, and the genes that would be passed forward through generations. They took everything from him, David said quietly. His freedom, his home, his name, his language. But they couldn't take what was in his blood, and that traveled forward through your great-great-great-great-grandfather, through Thomas, through Samuel, through my grandfather. Emma looked at him in the living light. The gift that travels through blood. Yes, and I'll pass it to my children. Maybe if you have children, and if they inherit the gene. The genetic trait is down, so there's a good chance. Emma said, I hope they have maker's hands too. 6 months later, the academic paper in the Journal of Medical Genetics awarded for excellence in historical genetics research. David and Marcus accepted them together at a ceremony in Baltimore. In his acceptance speech, David spoke not about science or genetics, but about identity and survival. For 124 years, my great-great-grandfather Samuel stood in that photograph, his 6-fingered hand visible but unseen. The technology to see him didn't exist yet. The framework to understand him didn't exist yet, but he was always there waiting. And because his family was proud enough to photograph him, because archivists were careful enough to preserve that photograph, because researchers were curious enough to look closely, we finally saw him. We finally understood, and in seeing him, we saw ourselves. That's the power of not hiding. That's the legacy my family gave me and the legacy I give my daughter. Be visible. Be proud. Be exactly who you are. Because someone in the future might need to see you to understand themselves. The photograph of Samuel and his family now resides permanently in the National Museum of American History and Culture's main hall, displayed prominently with interactive screens allowing visitors to zoom in on Samuel's hand and learn the full story. It has become one of the museum's most viewed exhibits. And sometimes late at night, David pulls up the high-resolution scan on his computer, zooms in on Samuel's 6-fingered hand, and feels the weight of connection across time. The same mutation, the same chromosomes, the same 12 fingers, linking him to a child who stood solemn and proud in a Charleston photography studio in 1899. Not knowing his hand would speak across more than a century. Samuel couldn't have known his photograph would be magnified and studied, that his hand would become famous, that his genetic legacy would be documented and celebrated. He simply stood that day, dressed in his finest clothes, being exactly who he was,